modern language students have a very high employment rate, even compared to other Cambridge graduates, actually. And it's because of the very diverse skill set that students develop in the course of their programs of study. We've had graduates engage in what some people might think of as the more obvious professions, like teaching, speech and language therapy, and translation, and even air stewarding. But we also have many more graduates, in fact, who go into business, finance, retrain as lawyers, join the diplomatic or civil service, go into banking, become entrepreneurs. An extraordinary wide range of professions, acting, all sorts of things.
Hello everyone, welcome to Cambridge from the Inside. We're here with a new guest today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Louise Haywood. I'm a fellow in Spanish in college, and in the Faculty of Modern Medieval Languages, I'm Professor of Medieval Iberian Studies.
Nice. And we're here today to talk about studying languages at Cambridge, the Modern and Medieval Languages course, MML. So to start off with, if someone wants to study languages at Cambridge, how can they do that? What options are there to study languages?
So everybody who takes, and we call it MML, so everybody who takes MML takes at least two languages. Often one of them is from beginner's level, ab initio level. One of them they've already studied at A level or the equivalent. And the languages that are on offer for full courses are French, Italian, German, Spanish, Portuguese, and Russian. Only French is not available at the moment as a beginner's language, but we're hoping we'll be able to introduce that in due course. So most of our students are taking a combination of two of those languages. They have equal weighting in the first year, and then the balance of the languages to each other changes according to the individual students' module choices. We call modules papers, and they run all year long. So to the individual students' papers choices as they move into the second year and through the degree. Can also combine a single modern language with a range of other subjects. And we've got quite complex programs. I've got a note of them here. A very popular program is with classics, particularly Latin, but you may also study Greek. You can study any of our modern languages with Arabic, Hebrew, or Persian. I've found that combinations with Arabic I see quite often. We have an HML degree, which is history and modern languages. And we have a single degree in linguistics or a combination of modern and medieval languages and linguistics. And here at Trinity Hall, we have a fellow who specialises in linguistics, Dr. Marika Milan, and she's the person who you would contact with questions about linguistics.
Brilliant. And am I right in thinking the MML and linguistics course, you would, at least in the first year, be doing one language with linguistics?
Yes, that's right. Yes. It's a new degree, so it's just coming onto the books, I think, with applications from October 2026. So we're looking forward to seeing applications from students to take that programme in this admissions round in December.
Nice. So, I mean, at least for me, when I was at school and thinking about studying languages at university, I had thought that people study languages at university in order to become fluent at the language. Is that the case, or is that like an oversimplification?
Oh, it's a really good question. When I was at school, it didn't seem to me possible to ever become fluent. And I personally chose to study a degree in English and Spanish because I was really interested in cultural expression, cultural materials, but I really wanted to travel, and it was a way of doing that. At university, most students become at least average native speaker fluent by the end of the degree in their oral expression. And they also have a capacity to read or to have conversations or to work in an environment that uses the languages that they've studied. So we call that target language environment. So they have, they do have full fluency.
Would I be right in thinking, so something like studying English at university wouldn't be about, the aim wouldn't be to become fluent in English, but be studying literature and history within literature. Would MML students have the opportunity to do that as well as learning the language?
Yeah. One of the things that makes modern and medieval languages a really interesting program to study is that not only are you acquiring a new language and a new set of a new structure in the way that you view the outside world, you're also exposed to a whole range of different kinds of materials: film, history, philosophy, psychology, literature, of course, art, sometimes even music, depending on your own interests and the choices that you make going through the degree program. So it can be very diverse. Yeah.
Nice. And for anyone who's watching and don't know what kind of things you can learn in the MML course, do you have any module examples of opportunities that students will be able to learn about?
Yes. So for example, in our first year of study, so we call the first year of study Part 1A. In Part 1A, we have introductory, we call them schedule papers. They look at cultural products. And if we look at the one in Spanish, for example, we will look at a range of different literary forms: poetry, sometimes a play, some novels, but we'll also look at a film, and we'll look at the way those materials reflect ideas about the culture and the moment in which they were made and received. And the period in our paper starts from the medieval period and goes right through to something this century, in the last decade or so. If you look at German, in contrast, you will have an opportunity to study some philosophy or psychology. So maybe perhaps some Freud or some Heidegger. I'm not sure if it's in the first year paper, but certainly by the second year, Part 1B, you can be doing those kind of options. And often there's a historical element there too. With French, quite often there's an element of either philosophy or psychology, and there's always some filmic material in the first year.
Nice. So would I be right in thinking, so Freud and Heidegger and authors from France and authors from Spain as well, that there are a lot of famous authors that people would enjoy reading them in their English translations, but would studying a languages degree give students an opportunity to read those works in their original language?
Yeah, absolutely. So students do have the opportunity, and we really strongly encourage the use of the original language over translations. Sometimes, depending on the material, we're encouraging students to read the original language in tandem with the translation. But when we do that, we're looking at evaluating the translation in relation to the original material, rather than using the translation to directly understand the original material. Yeah. I'm not sure if I've answered that question adequately.
Just on that, I was curious. Can you ever tell when you're reading a translation, or can a translation ever fully translate the original? I know it's quite a big question, but
Oh, that's a really big question to answer in a public place like a podcast. No, it can't. I don't think so. Something written, whether it's a literary text or maybe even a manual, encodes something in addition to the literal meaning of the text. A lot of that additional meaning is culturally produced. And the best example of this is for those people who did a COVID test during lockdown may remember seeing the illustrated guide on how to use it, where the way it showed you what to do with adults and children was signalled by a pair of big woolly boots for adults and small woolly boots for children, rather than as we might tend to do in English-speaking countries, an adult-sized and a small-sized person. So cultural things are encoded everywhere. And one of the real strengths of a modern languages degrees, it helps you develop the tools to understand cultural and ideological inputs in material. So things that we think of as common sense, it helps you identify how that differs across cultures.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So would I be right in thinking that when someone learns a foreign language, as you learn the language, you're also learning that their culture through their language?
You learn a lot about the target culture through studying the language and film or philosophy or novels or poetry or history of that culture. You learn a lot. You learn more through direct exposure to that culture. And in my view, and I don't have a good basis for this, but in my view, I don't think you ever really have the same experience of a culture as somebody who grew up in that culture. You can't ever have that same degree of knowledge. For example, I've lived in Spain 2 or 3 years, and my capacity to recognise references to children's culture is limited compared to somebody who grew up in Spain. My capacity to recognise adverts that became famous outside of the time I lived there, I don't have that. So there's lots of allusions in memes, for example, to cultural artefacts that aren't visible or identifiable if you haven't had direct experience of that, except through a lot of experience. I think you need the experience of the culture.
Yeah, that's really cool. And of course, it's good time to mention that if you're to do an MML degree, in your third year, you have the year abroad.
Yeah, that's right. In all of the degree programs that I've mentioned, you have the option of studying for a year abroad, and you can split the year abroad into 2 chunks and spend some in one area that uses as a first language one of the languages you're studying, and the second in a different area. Quite a lot of our students do that. And people do all sorts of different things. There's British Council runs a programme where you can go and teach in a secondary school, teacher training college or universities, a language teaching support person. But students do internships in all kinds of institutions, big football clubs, orchestras, the kind of business or profession they hope to go into. So, for example, a lawyer's office or a newspaper, or also there's the option to go and study at a university, one of the countries whose language that you're using. So I think there's really quite a lot of options. And we have an office in the faculty dedicated to helping our students find the right kind of year abroad for them, the right kind of activity for them.
Nice, yeah, that sounds really cool. And a really good reason to choose one of the languages degrees that you were talking about that we offer at Cambridge. So just wanted to know more specifically about Spanish and Portuguese, two languages that you can start from ab initio if at Cambridge. So anyone who's watching who's not currently doing Spanish Portuguese can still do those languages if they were to apply here, what things do you think are the most attractive or about doing Spanish and Portuguese?
I think one of the reasons why I chose to go on studying Spanish was because of the extremely high number of speakers of Spanish there are worldwide. It's about it's over 600 million speakers of Spanish worldwide, of which 520 million-ish are first language speakers. So it's an enormous number of people who have Spanish in particular as their first language. I don't have the figures for Portuguese. So that was a main attraction. It meant that when I was at school, it meant that I felt like I could travel really I haven't done it. I've only really been to Mexico and Spanish-speaking America and Spain. But it meant that I felt like I had the skills that I need to travel independently in Spanish-speaking America, and actually in large parts of the States where Spanish is spoken more than English.
Yeah, I guess being able to speak Portuguese opens up Brazil as well if you were to be in South America.
Many of our students who take Portuguese are really interested in Brazilian Portuguese culture, and many of them actually spend their year abroad in Brazil. We have links with universities in Brazil that enable people to go and study there and spend a year as a student. That's been I've found that a really popular option. And my students I teach in the final year have often spent time, in Rio.
Nice, that's really cool. It'd be such an amazing experience to be able to be in Brazil, but also partake in the language and culture. So, with regards to back to the MML course, how are Cambridge students taught when they're studying MML? Like, what would a typical day look like?
Oh gosh, when I was describing all the different languages and the ones that you can take ex A level and the ones that you can take as a beginner student, you can see it's a very difficult program to see what an average day would be like. Everybody's day is really different. In general, language classes are organised by the faculty and they take place in the morning. Lectures can be in the morning or afternoon. We might also have seminars. And then, of course, we have what we call here supervisions, and in Oxford they call tutorials, which are very small group teaching. So if we take a first-year student who's taking, let's take their A-level subject first, they would typically, for that subject in the faculty, they'd have 2 hours of lectures a week. So that would be everybody taking that language at that level would be in the lecture. So that's the biggest meeting of a group of people that our students typically have. Then they would have language classes, might be about 3 hours a week, could be more. There's a lot of independent learning when you're studying languages because you're needing to memorize and internalize vocabulary and linguistic structures. And then also, view films, read materials, view podcasts. So there's a whole range of different activities that you need to be filling your week up with. So lectures and language classes at the faculty. Then probably over a fortnight, you would have a small group oral language class. Small group varies between languages. Sometimes it's just 2, sometimes it's as many as 6. Normally it's closer to 2. And that would be in a college. It might not be here at Trinity Hall. It depends on your language and who's teaching the class. Then you would have 1 hour of supervision a fortnight, for which you would prepare to talk about or maybe even write an essay beforehand. Sometimes you don't do that, depends on the language. And you would have that with just one other student. And depending on the language, you might have that here in Trinity Hall, or you might have a session with a colleague in another college. depends on the content and the language, because modern medieval language is one of these programs where we prefer our students to be taught always by the specialist rather than somebody like, I'm a medievalist, I'll teach the first year as the survey paper. For the second year, my students will go out to another colleague who's a specialist if they aren't taking papers that I teach. So, for example, I might ask a film specialist to cover my film paper. For some languages, specifically French, there's also a seminar, which is a bigger group, normally 4 to 6, and they meet and talk about the material as a group, maybe make a small presentation. One of the other things that we've been really keen to do in that kind of fortnightly cycle is offer students an opportunity to study what we call critical theory. So critical theories are systematic ways of thinking about and approaching cultural material. And we have a program in which students are able to sample a range of different approaches of this sort to find what works for them and what works for their interests. That would be your ex-A level or equivalent student. For your ex-beginner student, you're going to have more language classes in a week and fewer supervisions about literary or cultural material, maybe not even really properly starting until Lent term, the second term of the academic year.
That's really interesting. And for anyone who doesn't know, would you be able to explain the differences between having less teaching by the faculty and by the college, and what the difference is between the two?
Okay, yeah. It's quite a difficult question. It's quite a difficult question to answer. So in the case of Trinity Hall, all of our language teaching is handled either by the faculty or by colleagues who are not members of the college. So, for example, oral classes are led by colleagues who largely teach language, and although we have for some years now had the same people teaching those languages for us for French, Spanish and German, they're not members of the college, so students would likely go for their oral supervision class to someplace that isn't on the college site, but that might be on the college site of the colleague who's doing the teaching. Yeah. Or it might be here. They might book a room here and have the classes here. So there's movement. You're moving between places. It might be that the person, your supervision partner, is not a member of the same college as you. And actually that can be great because it's expanding your social network, and that can be really, really helpful, I think. In the first year, for some languages, all of the supervisions, or the majority of the supervisions, will be in-house with a fellow who's a member of the college. And that's certainly true for Spanish. It's largely but not wholly true for Italian. It's largely but not wholly true for German. Yeah. So in those cases, specialists in other areas would tend to step in, and the student would go to a different college for the supervisions. Then for their content supervisions.
Yeah. So would I be right? Broadly, I might be too much of a generalization, but broadly, supervisions would be done in college with the directors of studies from that college, unless the college that you are part of doesn't have someone in the area, and they'll find someone else. That might mean you go to a different college to have a supervision. Yeah, that's absolutely right. We teach 6 languages plus linguistics, and we have a linguistics fellow, but we don't have 6 language fellows. So we can't offer
that's here. And there are actually very few colleges, if any, that have fellows in all of the languages. Then that would be the first year. In the second year, regardless of who the fellows are in any given college, the students will go to people who are specialists in the subjects that they've chosen to study. And sometimes they're with us who are already here in college, but sometimes they choose options that mean that they're going to a different college for supervision. So students from after the first year always go to the specialists in the areas that they want to study further.
Nice. And kind of back to the supervisions, something that I think is a large reason of why students want to apply to Cambridge. I was curious if are supervisions for MML different in Trinity Hall compared to other colleges, or how are supervisions handled here?
Yeah, okay. So here in Trinity Hall, we are not always asking for essays before a supervision. So some supervisors require an essay before a supervision. We don't necessarily always require written work before or after the supervision. And our focus is very much on helping students discover and explore their own interests and their own voice, irrespective of what those might be, of course, but in relation to the course material they're required to study.
Nice. Yeah. And I remember something we were talking about before about essay style writing and the Cambridge essay, and I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, yes. That's an interesting one. So in some schools and in some places in the university, you will hear people talking about the Cambridge essay, which is the idea that here at Cambridge you're expected to write an essay following a specific format in a specific way and presenting a specific kind of ideas. And we very much work against that stereotype. We're very much interested in allowing students to develop and explore their own expressive voices. To find a way of writing that expresses their interests and who they are, rather than trying to force students into a mould.
Yeah. So would I be right in thinking, as students progress through the course and go through their readings and teachings, they'll be developing their skills and learning a lot of other people's opinions and academics' works, but also encouraged to develop their own voice?
Develop their own voice, be encouraged and supported in critiquing the views of others, including us, obviously.
Yeah.
So developing the capacity to critique based on argument and evidence.
Yeah. Which I guess enables someone to have a large skill set, whether they choose to go into academia or into any like walk of life, and being able to kind of think for yourself, I guess.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Modern language students have a very high employment rate, even compared to other Cambridge graduates, actually. And it's because of the very diverse skill set that students develop in the course of their programs of study. We've had graduates engage in what some people might think of as the more obvious professions, like teaching, speech and language therapy, and translation, and even air stewarding. But we also have many more graduates, in fact, who go into business, finance, retrain as lawyers, join the diplomatic or civil service, go into banking, become entrepreneurs. An extraordinary wide range of professions, acting, all sorts of things.
That's really interesting. It's really cool. And would I be right in thinking that if for maybe like something like diplomacy, is if that's something that you think you would really want to do, then studying a languages degree gives you an advantage compared to a lot of other degrees.
Yes, I think with many of the fields that I've mentioned, having a languages degree gives you a lot of advantages. You have the demonstrable skill of being able to work with other cultures and other cultural materials. You have the capacity to synthesize and summarize arguments. You in some parts of our program, you can develop your numeracy skills depending what you choose to study. You have insights into psychology and philosophy, again, depending what you've chosen to study. You have the capacity to digest a large amount of information because, as you've said, students study primary materials, whether that's an art object, I don't know, a 19th century novel, a short poem, or a film, and understand what's in there, and then to read and think about different approaches that might help explore that material further, and then the capacity to critique other people's understanding of that material. So you've got very complex range of skills.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of people watching might be interested in becoming a lawyer, and will think that in order to achieve that, you have to study law at an undergraduate degree. Can you expand a bit more about how you can go into a law profession from MML or another degree?
Yes, although I won't be popular with our law fellows if I say this. Yes, it can be a really good option for people who would like to be lawyers when they graduate. There is a 1-year conversion program, which in fact we offer here at Cambridge, and quite a number of our graduate students are on that program here at Trinity Hall, actually. Where you learn the key skills that you need to become a practicing lawyer. I've had students go onto the bar, for example, from a modern languages degree. I think it's not uncommon.
Yeah.
I don't want to go as far as it's common, but for people who want to do it, it's a really viable option, particularly at the moment when getting into a law program is horrendously competitive.
Yeah. No, if you are watching and you're interested in becoming a lawyer, it's definitely something to look into, the law conversion course, and then deciding which undergraduate degree you would like to do. This is a bit of a topic change, but with regards to, I guess, MML recently, there's I guess the statistics show there's a slight gender skew in people applying for MML. Do you think there's an explanation for why that's the case?
It's a really interesting question, it was like, I've been here at Cambridge since 2000. I worked at St Andrews for 8 years before that. I went to uni myself in the mid-80s, and in my entire experience of studying modern languages, there has always been a gender skew. And I think that part of it is to do with attitudes in culturally that are reproduced in schools about what's a harder, more masculine sort of subject, and something that's more nebulous and therefore more feminine, so based on gender stereotypes really more than anything else. It's the only explanation that I have. I haven't looked into it, I haven't read about it, so I don't have a good grounded, scientifically grounded response. But yeah, there is a skew.
Yeah, but would I be right in thinking that the MML course, even though men are less likely to apply to MML, it's something that everyone should consider, especially the various opportunities there are to start a language from ab initio. So you wouldn't even need a language from be doing a language at A level for some courses.
Yeah, MML is a program for everybody, irrespective of gender, absolutely. And the program is set up in such a way that there are materials that interest almost everyone. There's something for almost everyone in the program, I think. At the moment, in our first year, I think we have more male students than otherwise. So it's not unusual in smaller pockets of the university to find different gender ratios, I guess. But yes, I think it's a program everybody should consider studying.
Yeah, I mean, I was always going to study languages at university until a very last minute change towards the sciences, and I think that was with us a part of the reasoning behind that was a worry about careers afterwards. But if I knew then what I know now, I probably would have stuck, because there's a whole range of careers I just did not realise you'd still be able to do studying languages.
Yeah, I think that's true for a lot of people. And I certainly find on open days, especially people's parents approach us and say we would rather that they studied, I don't know, chemistry, or which is what my son studies, or law. With many programs, it's or with many professions, it's possible to convert or to get a first appointment even more easily if you have a modern languages degree. So have a think about what you might want to do long term, and then choose the appropriate program. I have to be absolutely honest and say that I chose to take modern languages as part of my degree because I was at uni, as I said, in the mid-80s. That's when I started. It was a time of very high unemployment, especially youth unemployment, but generally a time of high unemployment. And I knew that my year abroad would get me abroad. I'd be able to travel and I would be able to work. And that was something that was going to be difficult otherwise. And that honestly was one of the main factors that made me choose to have a language as part of my degree.
That's really interesting. That's a really good reason to choose a language degree. I would love to move to France and not choosing not to study French has to this day made that a lot harder thing to make happen. And a language degree is also about the degree, but also about the opportunities.
Immersion is a really important part of deepening your knowledge and understanding of a culture and a language.
Nice. And outside of teaching, I was wondering what kind of research do you do, and what are your research interests?
Okay. Yeah. So my research is really concerned with identity and community. And so I'm interested in themes like how do we find social expressions of networks, or how do we find common aesthetic values emerging, or where and how is humour produced? So by whom, for whom, and about whom. So those are the kinds of areas that I work on as my research. And I work on the medieval period, as I've said. So for Spain, the material that I'm researching on is from about 1200 to about 1500, and for teaching it's a little bit earlier, maybe from about 700 to about 1500. So it's, we're talking about quite a while ago. And what I'm really looking at is what we can learn from those processes, or from those network formations, and how that can help us understand how we live now. And this isn't necessarily for everybody, but I'm interested also in how I can live better and how we as a community can live better now, and therefore what we can do for one another and the world. Sorry.
No, not at all. No, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
Try to unpack the three themes you're talking about that your research interest in. Could you explain each of them a bit more, one by one?
Oh gosh, I don't know if I can.
Yeah.
So
are they drawing from sources in the medieval period, or or is it
Yeah.
based on contemporary side
Okay.
things?
Oh
Because I
gosh.
guess when you
Yeah.
say humor, is that comedy from like a long time ago, or
Yeah.
is that or
So
identity?
yeah. So in terms of humor, what I've looked at for humor is what appears to have been intended as funny, provoking laughter.
Yeah.
In its moment of production and circulation. So what the structure is that underlies that thing that's meant to be funny. And when we're talking about the Middle Ages, we're really talking largely about slapstick humour and obscene humour, but we're also often talking about very cerebral jokes overlaid on a very body base. So a lot of verbal play that alludes to, for example, I don't know, perhaps the culture of book production and intellectual circles, or the culture of the church. So there's a lot of play with ambiguity. Yeah. So that's how humor works, and then after that, there's what humor does. What is its function in a given moment in relation to a given text, and often it's about forming collaborative relationships between the people involved in the process. Sometimes that involves a collaborative relationship in opposition to another group. Then you're starting to understand aspects of power structures, how a group becomes less well regarded, is put into a subservient or lower position. And then you can see that's a mechanism of humor as a mechanism of power and control. And then you can start to think about how humor is used in a meme that you come across. So it's about, I guess in that instance, it's more about understanding the deep structure of what's happening.
Yeah.
In that regard, I'm interested in how people signal affiliation to group membership. So that's moving beyond humour into how you would signal affiliation to a group membership, and how other members of the group might perceive your attempts at those signals. So I've been doing some work on a 15th century songbook, which has groups of poems by members of different Iberian courts who are trying to signal membership of a court group or of a particular literary circle. So I've been looking at the mechanisms they use there. And that's been making me think a lot about what happens in any kind of publicly disseminated research. Makes you think about, or me think about, what sources have been used. What's the relationship between the person who uses the source and the original source? Are people just citing other people like them? So that also has implications for thinking about the way in which algorithms in social media tend to function, where what you spend longer viewing occurs more and more in your stream, in your feed. So it's that those kind of issues, I guess, or how they fit together. Some of them. I don't know if we've covered all three of my big topics.
No, that sounds really interesting, and I think it's really cool how to be able to have the skill set to be able to go into different points in the past and to try to see what's happened, and then to see common traits in the present. And I guess looking at different examples in the past that most people haven't looked at, I guess, means that there's more material and more situations to look at that people haven't seen. I guess what I'm trying to say is not many people would have looked into this 15th century Iberian court case.
In that particular case, no, really not very many, but spent quite a number of years working on a study of a specific 14th century text, and it's had an extraordinary amount of work done on it. So often the material has had a lot of exposure. And I was thinking that some of your listeners might be interested in why not just look at the contemporary material. And I think from my perspective, one of the issues with that is that sometimes when you're in a situation or a frame, standing back in a way that's sufficiently objective to see fully what's happening is almost impossible for most of us. So it can be a useful way of setting up relationships between similar but not exactly the same objects or things or public feelings.
Yeah. So looking at something in the medieval period, does that give enough distance that it is more likely for you to observe it objectively rather than looking at a period that you're part of?
Oh, objectively, I shouldn't have used that word. I don't know if it's possible to look at something objectively, even in science. I think maybe that's not. I think we're starting to understand that even by observing, you make shifts and changes. So, yeah.
Not
Sorry.
No. It's, yeah, and that reminds me of the quantum physics and how it does. Yeah, observing does have an effect. But I meant more to put the word objectively aside, because I think it's a really interesting point that looking at instances in history, historical cases that are long, like a very long time in the past, in a culture that's completely different to yours, makes it more likely for you to see something for what it is rather than having a bias. Are you more likely to be biased if you're looking at something that's happening in your own time period?
I'm going to go with I am, yes, but I couldn't speak for anyone else. I think the other thing about looking at the cultural production and the history of the past is how much hope and optimism it can bring, because even although there has been, catastrophically horrific events in the past, we can see that there's change, that change can happen, that there are mechanisms by which change can be produced. And I think that gives us, in this moment, hope, although perhaps that's naive.
No, yeah, but I think there is a difference between only knowing the recent past and knowing like the huge tragedies that happened in humanity and seeing how people have come through that. That can be a circular process, but it's better to to start that rather than staying in with a sense of despair. And
change is possible. Things can be slowed down or even halted. And
that kind of brings me on to the last question. I guess maybe some parents in open days have like had this question of why do people study the humanities, and what is there to gain from, whether it's the humanities degree or just studying the humanities in general?
The first and most obvious thing, and the thing that those parents seldom want to hear, is pleasure.
Yeah.
You can get a lot of personal pleasure and satisfaction from exposure to humanities material, and that in itself has a value for life. But the answer that they, I think, would want to hear more is that you develop a set of skills which are highly transferable across a range of different professions and contexts. And at the moment, when people are tending to have portfolio careers, I think that's more important than it ever has been, that you have a broad range of skills at your fingertips that you can bring to a set of different kinds of employment or self-employment situations. It gives you the resources and capacity to adapt.
So on that phrase, portfolio careers, which I think is something that young people sort of aren't really aware of unless like family members have a portfolio. Can you explain what that means for anyone who's listening?
Yes, of course. So there's two ways of thinking about a portfolio career, and one is about the professional life of an individual, where they might switch through several different professions. They might start life, for example, since we've been mentioning chemistry more than once, I think. They might start life as a chemist. They might become a lab tech. They might go into school teaching. They might have a parallel podcast educating people about the chemistry of food, say. They might spend some time working in restaurants. And so through time, it can be a series of shifts. A lot of people also have a portfolio career where they, rather than having a single employer, they have maybe one employer and are self-employed for the rest of their working hours, or they're wholly self-employed, and they might do things like run an educational podcast, do some supply teaching, perform music, and also do plumbing. So, it's just having multiple strands or strings that you can use as your profession. It can look unstable sometimes to parents, but it seems to bring those who are able to find a range of income streams a great deal of personal satisfaction, and can, depending on the different professions that you engage in, give a great deal of freedom for travel or bringing up a family, or spending time with older generations in the family. So it can be quite liberating. It can, depending on how successful the person is in terms of monetary gain, it might not always yield sufficient income for a mortgage in the southeast, but it can have compensatory benefits for people about free time, capacity to movement, capacity to work elsewhere.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think most people, especially applicants, think that after university you go and get a job, and people will be looking to go into work, but their only pathway moving forward would be to be employed. But there are a lot of individuals who have a portfolio of work, and that is something to think about, and especially when because of the point of can grant individuals a lot of freedom. And I think that's also something that because you were talking about how the MML degree and humanities in general can provide individuals with a lot of pleasure, but it sounds like the MML degree also provides individuals with a lot of freedom that's quite unique to the MML degree, in terms of being able to travel and live abroad, and kind of increasing your freedom is a good reason to choose a degree, I'd say. Before we finish off, was there any last comments you wanted to share with applicants, or advice for people who are thinking about which degree to apply for?
So it's a really good question. I think if you want to get a good degree, taking a subject or subjects that actually really interests you personally is really important, and we see that, I think, in our students here. So when we're interviewing, we're trying to judge whether that student really has a passion for, I don't know, Spanish and Russian, say, or Spanish and history, if this is me interviewing. So we're really looking for that degree of interest. And I think that's what that interest, and of course, is what carries a student through a course, helps them perform well, and takes them out into life with a good degree. And I think that's true here. I think it's also true elsewhere. The other thing I'd say is, I think in my, admittedly quite limited experience, a lot of students look to their A-levels or their GCSEs and their A-levels or their equivalents to decide on what degrees to do. And I think that a lot of students would really benefit from exploring more widely what range of subjects are available. So in the case of languages, it might be, not necessarily applying for the 2 languages that you have an A-level in. Thinking about, should I maybe think about an ab initio language? Is there one that I'm really curious about? Why is that? So that's what I'd say about modern and medieval languages. But honestly, for anybody thinking about a degree, don't just look at your A-levels. Don't just look at your GCSEs. Have a think about what do you think you're really interested in at the moment? How could you further that? It doesn't have to be tied to the actual A-levels. There's some degrees where you have to have the relevant A-level. You must have 1 language A-level, for example, for our course. But often we have people with, French A-level, maths and further maths, or chemistry and maths. So I think looking beyond your A-levels and GCSEs is important.
Nice. Yeah, that's really good advice. Well, thank you so much, Louisa, for a really interesting podcast. And thank you for the viewers for watching. If you have any questions, please do put them in the comments. We've done a whole list of podcasts on subjects that we offer at Cambridge. So we have a separate playlist for that. So do check that out. If you're in the middle of your application process or middle of writing a personal statement, we have podcasts on that and a separate admissions advice playlist. So do check those podcasts out as well. And we'll see you guys next time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, how was that?
Yeah.
I thought it was really good.
Oh, I'm glad.
Yeah.